Hello. Hello, welcome to Helen Buster Live Show. Today we have some special guests here. Look, fruits. We have some logan, mango, dragon fruit, pineapple, durian, coconut, and this coconut is from Thailand, this one is from Malaysia, and this one is from Philippines. So they're mostly from the Southeast Asia. So as you may know, today we're going to talk about something that is related to those countries. And here, our host, he is the Asia Society's young leader.
Hi guys. Well, bugandang, Nali. Yeah. That was it's very appetizing. I had a light breakfast, and all these fruits, largely from the tropical areas.
Yeah,
right?
tropical fruits.
So appetizing to me.
So you have any stories that's related to those countries?
Yeah. I was. I know we're talking about ASEAN today, but I was very honored to be, part of this Asia Society Asia 21 program, and met classmates, students from pretty much, each and every one of these countries that you mentioned. It's a very interesting experience. When you talk about Asia, from a Western perspective, they think that Asia is a monolithic whole, but it is not. Asia is a huge landmass, ranging from Turkey to Indonesia, from the Siberian, Eurasia to tropical, the Philippines. So it's also diverse in religion and culture. Think about the Muslim majority Indonesia, Pakistan, to the Buddhist Myanmar, and the atheist countries like China. It is a very diverse region, a diverse place. And also, I want to tell you this, in Asia Society's programs, back then in 2017, China and the Philippines, they had disputes over South China Sea, political relations not so great. But I met two Filipina friends, one of whom was an accomplished farmer who helped millions of her fellow countrymen sell their products online and made them, millionaires. So I would say that you've got to get out there and meet people, and I did. I did meet my fellow Asian classmates and friends through that program. And I would say before the program, many of these countries like Malaysia, Thailand, they were pinpoints on the map. But afterwards, after meeting and chatting with these people, these countries really became places in my heart. So once again, very excited to talk about Asia, ASEAN, and the trade program that we're talking about today.
Okay, cool. So today, of course, we're going to talk about more than just fruits. But Guan, before you go, so when the life is over, you can pick two fruits.
Two fruits?
Yes. What would you choose?
I'm not a big fan of durian because this gives you a certain smell. I would pick mango for sure, and coconut. It's a little high in sugar, but I'll take it anyway. And I think I'll do some of these. Dongyan, right?
Yeah, try it. Okay.
But thank you guys.
Thank you.
I'll see you soon.
Good luck for your
See you,
show.
folks. Hello and welcome to Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Liu Xing. In this series, we dissect stories that are making headlines around the world and talk to my guests to compensate for the missing pieces of the puzzle. So join us in real time by sending us your questions or comments via the CGTN webpage on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or Weibo. If you're watching this live on the CGTN app, email us at thepointwithalex@cgtn.com. Let us know what you think. We start the live streaming every Friday at 11 a.m. Beijing time, so get in touch, and we just might read out your comments. Before we start, let's look at some social media comments we got on the topic we're talking about today. At Abel for World said, "This is the way. In Chinese old saying, you must take care of yourself first, feed the family well, then help neighbors, finally contribute yourself for the whole nation, which means it is time to unite neighbors for multi-win better future. Multi-win better future sounds good to me. And for World Citizen says, congratulations to the Asian countries that are giving a wonderful example of the importance of cooperation and solidarity in today's multipolar world to save lives and defeat global crises as COVID-19 international public health crisis. And at FUSA, RCEP said, not surprised it is becoming so convenient for the West to villainize China out of insecurity and illusion. Well, we will get to some of those perspectives later on. But this week, we're looking at media coverage on the major new trade deal signed by 15 Asian countries. You may have probably heard it by now. RCEP, that stands for Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It is the largest trade deal ever signed, and it is considered a vote of confidence for free trade and multilateralism amid the rising protectionism and COVID-19 pandemic. But when you read some of the media reports about it, the trade deal is portrayed as more of a geopolitical coup for China, as if China is taking advantage of its neighbors to extend its influence in the region. Is that really the case? Let's look at some facts. 8 years in the making, the RCEP was signed by 15 countries, including 10 ASEAN members, plus China, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand and Australia. That means the RCEP accounts for around 2.2 billion people, with a B. That is about 30% of the world's total population. The country's combined GDP totals around, as you can see, $26 trillion. That is also 30% of the world's GDP and trade. Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India pulled his country out of the trade deal last year on the grounds that it might not be in the best interests of all Indians. RCEP said the door remains open if India decides to join later on. RCEP is still the world's biggest free trade bloc, bigger than both the US-Mexico-Canada agreement and the European Union. It is also the first free trade agreement signed between China, Japan, and South Korea. So what will RCEP actually do? Well, it aims to make trade among these countries more efficient by lowering some tariffs and simplifying customs procedures. It also covers areas such as online shopping and personal information protection, transparency, and paperless trading. RCEP is also expected to enhance market access, with tariffs and quotas eliminated in over 65% of goods traded. It is also expected to encourage more investment, which will hopefully add more jobs to the region. In a joint statement, the leaders of the participating nations said the signing of RCEP agreement demonstrates our strong commitment to supporting economic recovery, inclusive development, job creation, and strengthening regional supply chains, as well as our support for an open, inclusive, rules-based trade and investment agreement. Of course, at the end of the day, it is all about implementation. Yet this is a significant deal in more ways than one. But when you read some media reports, they make it sound as if the trade deal is more about China projecting its own geopolitical power and ambition in the region at the expense of its smaller neighbors. Let's take a look at some recent examples. The first article is from Guardian. The article from November 15th reads in its headline, China and 14 Asia-Pacific countries agree on historic free trade deal. First of all, the headline. China is separated from other 14 countries who also signed the agreement. Of course, China is a big country and a larger economy, but the headline gives readers the impression that this is somehow a China-led deal. But in fact, it has been ASEAN-led. And the article went on to say this. The trade deal has been seen as a significant step towards removing trade barriers as well as extending the influence of China. Extending the influence of China, that is a narrative promoted by this article and many others these days. It is a concern, for sure, by some people. But the article would have been more convincing if it had specified who actually sees it that way. Is it a top economist or the World Bank or the IMF? None was specified. It is also worth noting that the suspicion follows the statement with a quote from the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, who says pretty much the opposite, that the deal is, quote unquote, a victory of multilateralism and free trade. Being critical is understandable. That is the nature of journalism. In the West, we understand that. But it could have been more of a balanced piece if we also mentioned the fact that this deal is a decade in the making where diplomacy eventually prevailed, as it is. Next up, a New York Times headline, also from November 15th, reads, China-led trade pact is signed in challenge to U.S. The deal sealed on Sunday stands as a potent symbol of Beijing's growing economic sway in Southeast Asia at a time of uncertainty over Washington's economic ties with the region. This article is blowing Beijing's role out of proportion, folks. It has played an instrumental role in shaping the agreement and keeping it alive, but again, it is factually inaccurate to say or even suggest this is a China-led trade deal. If anyone could be seen as the founder of the agreement, it would be the ASEAN countries, which first introduced the idea at an ASEAN summit in 2011, not China. China was invited back then to participate as a partner. The article also says this is one of the world's largest regional free trade agreements, a pact designed by Beijing as a counterweight to American influence in the region. This just adds more geopolitical spin to this story. The U.S. has very little, if anything, to do with the hard work the 15 countries had been doing for the past decade to boost trade. And let's remember that the negotiations have been going on for 8 years, long before the Trump administration pulled the U.S. out of another major trade deal, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So the whole argument that China wants to move into the vacuum left by the U.S. withdrawal from TPP is not super convincing. And the article also fails to mention that the U.S. can join the RCEP pretty much anytime it wants to. The big bad China narrative is not precisely convincing when the article tries to use the size and style of the different national flags in the video chat. Here's what I mean. The article says simultaneously broadcast on a split screen, the different ceremonies offered a glimpse of each country's political culture. Vietnam, the host country for the talks this year, and South Korea and Cambodia each had one or two small desktop flags next to their ministers. At the other extreme, China's ceremony was conducted in front of a wall of 5 very large, bright red Chinese flags. Well, to suggest that the color, size, or number of national flags in the video chat matters, implies some kind of predatory motive, is perhaps a bit far-fetched. This is just the backdrop that China happens to use for many of its international virtual meetings these days. Interesting evidence that China is extending its influence. I want to close our show with an example of how another article handled the story, an article that looks at the trade deal for what it is. A Bloomberg story from November 14th reads, Asia-Pacific nations sign biggest regional trade deal. The opening paragraph says Asia-Pacific nations, including China, Japan, and South Korea, on Sunday signed the world's largest free trade agreement, encompassing nearly a third of the world's population and gross domestic product. Here and in the headline, China is presented as part of the deal, not as an outlier. The article clearly illustrates that some of the finer points of the agreement, why it mattered, and the contextual background. It also devotes significant space to what leaders of these countries actually say about how they feel about the deal. Important perspectives that many other articles chose to ignore. For example, it quotes the Vietnamese Prime Minister, who said ahead of the signing ceremony that the completion of negotiations is a strong message affirming ASEAN's role in supporting the multilateral trade system, and that agreement will contribute to developing strong supply chains that have been disrupted due to the pandemic, as well as supporting economic recovery. And Indonesia's trade minister said this: the trade agreement will help Indonesia recover from the pandemic and possibly increase its GDP by 0.05% in the next 20 years. And also Japan's trade minister said, through the tariffs removal, I believe there will be a major impact on improving Japan's exports and making the region's supply chains more efficient. A lot of the region's leaders see a lot of potential to be unpacked and unlocked by the RCEP, and their voices matter. The narrative that China is using the agreement against the U.S. or manipulating its neighbors into submission is a simplistic way to look at things at the best. With that, we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to our guests about the RCEP and what it's all about and why it matters. Stay with us, folks.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point.
Welcome back, folks. We have with us from Singapore, Sean Roach, Chief Asia-Pacific Economist at S&P Global Ratings. And also in Beijing, Mr. Zhang Jianping, Director from Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economy from Darwin, Australia, Daryl Goupy, CEO of Financial Markets Consulting Group, GoupyTraders.com. Daryl, let me go to you first. You've heard probably from our program earlier on about different narratives surrounding RCEP. Some say this is a a win-win situation. It has great potential to unlock, the benefits of trade. Others say that this is the China-led and China-dominated trade deal. What do you think?
No, it's certainly not a China-led and China-dominated trade deal. What's important is that it's the first of the multilateral trade deals that are taking place in a post-COVID environment. Now, China has quite a significant role to play in this, but it is not leading this particular development at this stage. It's not a Trojan horse for China.
And what do you think it will do to countries in the region, to member countries?
The important thing is that countries in the region have this large emerging middle class. Now, either we have that middle class supplied from outside of the region, and that's really what happened to China when it first began to expand, or alternatively, the region itself supplies itself. Now, that's also at the core of Xi Jinping's dual circulation economy, the idea that we can produce goods within the region to satisfy the consumer demand within the region. It doesn't count out exports, but it means that they become less important in the total mix.
Sean, in Singapore, Singapore has been a key player in Southeast Asia, a key member of ASEAN. How do you look at this trade deal from, perhaps the perspective of Singapore's?
Well, I think for Singapore, it's an absolute win for absolute sure. Singapore's a highly open economy, very trade dependent. And I think this provides some great growth opportunities going forward. I would say, in fact, it's, a diplomatic coup for all of Asia in these very protectionist times. They've managed to overcome some very significant trust deficits across the region and between countries and get this deal over the line. And I think Singapore and ASEAN played a leading role in getting this done. And that really shows the power of multilateralism. It's really worked in ASEAN, and now it seems to be working across Asia Pacific.
This, as some media articles suggest, a geopolitical move by China, either intentionally or unintentionally, to counter America's influence in the region? John?
Well, I think we need to step back and just look at what this is. It's a trade deal. It's a free trade agreement. So the idea here is you're going to take almost 90% of traded goods, cut the tariffs on those to zero over a period of time, and simplify trade across borders. And I think it's in all the countries' interest in Asia Pacific to get that deal done. I think a lot of the countries were looking at the future. They were looking at aging societies and slowing growth. And this is one way that they can engineer a faster productivity growth and a better long-run future. So I think it was in everybody's interests to get the deal done. And again, I think that benefits China, but it has tremendous benefits for the rest of the region too.
Mr. Zhang, in Beijing, what do you think? I mean, what part of the deal stand out for you? I mean, what are the items that you're most passionate and excited about?
Actually, RCEP initiated by ASEAN 10 economies 8 years ago. Since that time point, from Chinese side, we confirmly, strongly to support this new initiative. Also, we respect the role of ASEAN countries as a centrality. From Chinese side, we just serve as a promoter and a supporter to promote negotiation in the past years. Also, we are very happy to see finally in this region we can have a new mega regional trade agreement. Also, all of those members, on one hand, we can enjoy trade creation effects, investment creation effects, and more job opportunities in the region. All of countries can support their economic growth in order to counter the global economic slowdown. Meanwhile, I think that for Asia Pacific region, that in the medium and long run, we hope to realize Beijing roadmap of AFTAC. I think that RCEP will be a very critical step. Meanwhile, I think that RCEP also shows that from Chinese side, we are supporting globalization and regional economic integration.
Right, Mr. Zhang, you earlier said that the Chinese President Xi Jinping's Asia dream is coming to fruition with the signing of this pact. You also said that this trade deal has a lot to do with China's Belt and Road Initiative and hopefully involving these member states. Can you elaborate?
You know that Asia Pacific Dream provided on APEC meeting in Beijing. At that time, all of those 21 economies, including the US, agreed that we hope.
Well, Mr. Zhang, we don't have a great, reception over there. Let me go to our guest in Australia.
Daryl. Asia region.
Hold on, Mr. Zhang, 1 second. Sorry about that. Daryl, let me ask you about this. China-Australia trade relations that have been dominating headlines these days. Not great news, unfortunately. We've heard about wine and beef exports being restricted. Also, there are some retaliatory measures from the Aussie side. What do you think this RCEP trade deal, to which both China and Australia are part, will do to China-Australia trade ties?
There are two perspectives on this. So an Australian economist, Tim Harcourt, says it's very positive for Australia-China relations because it puts China and Australia at the same table. So there is time for discussion, and we can use this as a side doorway of perhaps thawing out some of the relationships. But on the other hand, there is a narrative in Australia for some quarters that says this is an opportunity to make sure that China conforms with a global rules-based order. Now, it's hard to reconcile both of those positions at this point in time, but the reality is that RCEP gives the probability of creating a trade environment where there is harmonisation of tariffs, which is one issue, harmonisation of cross-border procedures, which is another issue, and the opportunity to be able to set up a trade cross-border system that is independent of the US dollar settlement and that can't be held to hostage by third parties.
But, you know, the trade deal is still subject to political winds, right? I mean, there are executive orders signed by, you know, for example, Canberra or Beijing that can say, look, you guys are no longer welcome to export wines, or, you know, China is no longer welcome to export certain stuff to Australia. Do you think, you know, this trade deal can somehow override some of the executive orders in place that are disrupting China-Aussie trade?
Well, it's important to recognise that RCEP at this stage doesn't have a dispute resolution mechanism. That's something that still has to be worked out. So it appears that any disputes around trade issues in RCEP would still probably end up going to WTO for arbitration. Now, what form, of course, WTO arbitration takes in a post-Trump environment, we're not too sure, but it certainly will be much better than what we currently have. So there's no dispute resolution mechanism at this stage, but there is an agreement to work towards the harmonisation of protocols or procedures of tariff elimination, etc.
Right, Mr. Zhang, I'm so sorry to have cut you earlier on. Let me go back to you if we can, Mr. Zhang in Beijing. So, I mean, the Western press, of course, have framed this deal as China projecting its geopolitical ambition. Is that China's intention to start with?
I think that firstly, very important. This is regional trade agreement, also belonging to mega FTA. That means actually economic cooperation will be the priorities. Of course, maybe in the medium and the long run, there will be some of potential political influences, because you know that political factors, economic factors, actually they are promoting each other. But I think that it's too early, to talk about its political influence at this stage. I noticed that today, actually, COVID-19, pandemic and global economic slowdown, that's major challenges faced by all, RCEP members and APEC members. I think that RCEP will create our new, confidence for, future development. I just like to add one sentence that is, some of APEC members also are our Belt and Road, cooperation members. I think that we hope they can, BRI and APEC cooperation can promote each other.
Right, Sean, in Singapore, let me go to you. From the perspective of an economist like yourself, what will be your recommendations and advice to policymakers, of this trade deal who might be watching our programs? What are the challenges ahead, and what are the issues that they should pay attention to?
That's a really good question, because I think the policy challenges are very different across different types of economies. Actually, I think the biggest challenges now face the Southeast Asian economies of ASEAN, who are at the forefront of leading this effort. They're going to have to start preparing their economies for a much more competitive environment. And that's good news for these economies, because what it does, it creates incentives, I think, for the reforms that some of these economies need. Just to give you an example, just in the last few months, the Indonesian government has passed a wide-ranging labor reform law, which will make the cost of labor lower in the future in Indonesia. That will make Indonesian businesses more competitive, and that's going to help them in this new trade landscape. So from my perspective, I think where the biggest policy challenges are going to be is in Southeast Asia, but that's also where the greatest opportunities could be in the medium run.
And Daryl, in Australia, what do you think? As a consultant yourself, who has run businesses before, what would be your concerns for this trade pact and also its implementation going forward?
I think one of the major concerns about implementation is which set of protocols and standards is it going to adopt. Now, going back to Mr. Zhang's comments regarding Belt and Road Initiative, it's certainly clear that there are significant numbers of RCEP members who are involved in BRI initiatives. And already we are talking about some common agreements, or usage anyway, of digital rules, of cross-border digital transactions, the introduction of DCEP, the digital renminbi, once that expands beyond China borders. This helps set a framework for smoother cross-border transactions. That's essential, that's vital. For harmonisation of software, of protocols, of trade and export rules and so on. So there is a reasonable probability that some of the existing BRI standards will become de facto RCEP standards as well. Now, that will worry the United States, it will worry Australia. So there will be some tension moving forward. Not that I want to put a negative spin on what RCEP has achieved, it's very, very significant. But we also need to be realistic about some of the potential road bumps that are going to stretch in front of us before ratification comes into place. And ratification has to be completed by the end of 2021.
Mr. Zhang, what do you think? What could be some of the road bumps ahead, and how can countries overcome those?
I like to say that just following the saying by the last presentation, I think that a Belt and Road Initiative will provide a very comprehensive and systematic economic cooperation for all of those partners, especially policy dialogue and infrastructure connectivities will provide better conditions for trade and investment liberalization and facilitation. In this regard, I think that in the medium and long run, BRI can provide better conditions for all of partners. Especially, I think that a free trade agreement may be focusing on trade, investment, global supply chain, and labor, environmental, those issues. But the scope is still quite limited. Also, the mechanism also quite limited. In this regard, BRI will be more comprehensive.
Right. And finally, Sean, I want to go to you and talk about U.S.-China trade relations. We know that in all likelihood, Biden is probably going to be sworn in January the 20th. And what are your expectations for the Biden administration when it comes to trade, and particularly trade with China?
It looks like the policy approach is going to be more multilateral and more predictable. So that, in some sense, reduces the acute risks of an escalation of a trade war in the next 12 to 18 months. That's the good news. The bad news, I think, is that if you look at the US, there is still a lot of bipartisan support for a decoupling.
Do you expect
the existing tariffs, we think they're going to... They will, but gradually over time, though we don't think that's going to happen overnight. It will take, I think, a period of time, and there will have to be some engagement between the US and China to facilitate that. So I think it's going to be a gradual process, but I think from Asia Pacific's perspective, the whole relationship is going to become more predictable. And I think that's going to help confidence, lower risk premium, and boost growth. And we've already seen that being priced in by financial markets across the region.
There in Australia, what do you think?
Yes, I would agree. And that's a very important change that's taking place. So RCEP, as we've pointed out, is a multilateral agreement which supplants a whole range of unilateral agreements that already are sitting in place. It provides a platform moving forward for greater harmonisation, as they say, across the changes in the regulations and so on. These are opportunities that need to be grasped. The key problem that faces it is this dichotomy between adopting a US-centric system of internet protocols, AI protocols, 5G protocols, or adopting a Chinese set of protocols. And that is a decision that is potentially likely to split RCEP. And that's something that's going to have to be handled very, very carefully. But the opportunities are there for a much greater expansion of trade, more efficiencies across the borders, particularly with the increased use of blockchain, which will underpin this implementation.
Yeah, certainly a lot of consumers, a lot of people that I've talked to are not big fans of a type of war between the two biggest countries. I want to thank all our guests today. Sean Roach, Chief Asia Pacific Economist at S&P Global Ratings, thank you. And Mr. Zhang Jianping, Director from Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economy, as well as Dairo Gupi from Darwin, Australia, his CEO of the financial markets consulting group, GupiTraders.com. Thank you also very much, gentlemen. And that will do it for this edition of Headline Buster, brought to you by The Point. I'm Wang Guan, sitting in for Liu Xin. Thank you also very much for tuning in and for your comments and suggestions. I will take a look at some of them later on. Until next time, take care.
Go.
Guys.
Hi. Comments here.
Okay, let's see. Oh, lots of hearts.
A lot of hearts, yes.
Lots of hearts. It's so sweet. Let's see. Sincerely. KNT said sincerely. Heart, heart, heart. Heart back to you. Okay, China, please spearhead similar deal for Central Asia RCEP, Central Asia Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This comment is from user Xavier Planet. Yeah, I mean, Central Asia, I've never been to Central Asia. The closest I've been is Kashgar, that borders Kyrgyzstan. Kashgar, of course, part of Xinjiang, China. RCEP. Sounds good to me. I mean, let's see what happens. Black King said People's Republic of China is next to Soviet Union. Right, it is over there geopolitically and geographically. What about this friend? I love beef hot pot. Indian Shaku said, what has India contributed to the world except for filling the pockets of their colonial masters, the UK? Whoa, very harsh comment over there. And Dave M said, from the USA, hello there. And who else? Who else do we have? Some folks left more than one comment. Actually, they left more than 5 comments. Trader John said, when China was the superpower, Asia was the most prosperous region of the world. Yeah, reminding me of the Tang Dynasty, actually, right? 13 centuries ago, 14 centuries ago.
Back to the ancients.
Yeah, that was good old days, I would say. Let's see, what else do we have here? Mr. Mark Duncan said, I love China. Well, Mark, thank you for the comments.
Thank you.
You know, wherever you're from, you're more than welcome to come over here when the pandemic is over. There are currently travel restrictions right now. I understand, but really, let's hope that we're with soon and you guys can all travel back. What else? We'll read one last comment. Who's going to get their last word? No more comments?
No more comments.
No more comments? Okay.
Then we can enjoy our fruit.
Yeah. I'll pick a mango. I'll take it for real, yeah?
Okay.
If you don't mind.
And cameraman, do you want one
That'll be my lunch. That'll be my dessert for lunch, actually. Dessert after lunch. Thank you, guys.
Pick one. Hi. Fruits, come. Okay.